Right, we've spoken about, mentioned cyber. Certainly from our point of view, this cyber world has sort of gone right into the fraud world, and the two things are almost becoming indivisible. The vast majority of the fraud we're seeing has some cyber connection, simply because most activity that people engage in now has some cyber connection, and the villains have just moved into those areas. We're seeing huge growth in frauds aimed against businesses, especially using cyber, and some of them have been very damaging. I suppose to explain, first of all, where I come into this, because you're sort of wondering why, I suppose. I sit within the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which is the business end of action fraud. How many of you have heard of action fraud, just out of interest? Well, that's good. That's better than most audiences. And to some extent, that's our fault, and I'll talk to you a bit about why and what we're trying to do about that. So we're really receiving, and I'll go into the more detail about quite how action fraud and the NFIB work, but we're receiving what should be the majority of fraud reporting and cybercrime reporting for the UK. I say the UK, England and Wales, although we do get data from Northern Ireland and Scotland, and we're looking at how we can bring those two areas of the UK in, so we sort of are literally covering the whole of the UK. What am I going to talk to you about? Look at some of the trends we're seeing, some of the changes. There's some stuff that I imagine you've seen before, some of it may be new. We're certainly seeing variations on themes that we've seen before, where they're taking an old fraud and just bringing it into the 21st century. Other types are completely new, because new systems, new processes have come into being, and fraudsters and organised criminals have come into that and seen how they can take advantage of that. I'm then going to talk to you a little bit about action fraud and basically the reporting side of it. I imagine those of you who've had some dealings with action fraud may have had some issues with it, and I'll talk you through how that has come to be and what we're trying to do to improve that, because we are aware that it is not a perfect system. It's very much a piece of work in progress, and working with business is going to be crucial to making it work properly. And then a little bit about what we can do for you as far as what we do with that data, that information, the process involved in getting crime from action fraud to police, and sort of set your expectations around how that works and what can and can't be done and what is being done. And then look at some of the basic things that can be done around trying to sort of protect your businesses. Now, I realise you've probably got various levels of businesses, from small businesses to large multinationals potentially here, and you're going to have different issues and the solutions are going to be different. So I've tried to put in some things that will potentially cut across all those areas, but if there are things there where you think, actually I know that, that's because I've tried to touch sort of on really from a very basic level up to some things that might sort of be useful within larger companies. So bear with me with that. So what are we seeing? Cyber enabled, and again, there's lots of issues around terminology here. We would see it basically as anything where the internet, computers, mobile devices are a part of it, but they're not the key part of it. They're sometimes the method of communication or the method of cashing out. So we're not talking about necessarily here the pure cyber or cyber-dependent crime, as I think it's defined by the MCA. So this is the things where there's a cyber element. What are we seeing? Big one, mandate fraud. Does anyone know what I mean by mandate fraud? No. Basically, we're talking here really about redirections of payments. So part of your normal business, you're making payments, you're receiving payments. As a criminal, if I can get that payment directed to me somehow and disappear with the money before anybody works out what's happened, for me that's quite a good idea. And certainly with the internet, it's become much easier. Hardly to make a contact, so we're seeing emails being hacked into, or emails being spoofed. When I say spoofed, basically you get an email that looks like it's coming from a supplier or a client. It's got their email header on it. Unless you're aware of just how easy it is to put an email header, it says basically anything. You know, you could sit down within 5 minutes, you could have one that said City of London Police and was reasonably convincing. We've certainly seen those. Similarly with telephones, to make a telephone number appear to be anybody's telephone number incredibly easy, and it's getting easier. There's now apps you can get on Apple that will basically hide it and disguise your phone number. So you can make a phone call and it will appear, when your staff are looking at the numbers, it will appear to be from your customers. It will appear to be almost anybody they want it to be. So again, it's a real awareness issue, and when I come towards sort of the protection, a lot of this is about being aware of what can be done, and then you can start protecting yourself. But if you don't know it can be done in the first place, how can you protect yourself? So that whole piece around awareness. And certainly we're seeing the use of spoofed emails, spoofed telephone numbers, to make that contact into the business, to get the bank account where payments are being made changed, and get that payment redirected. Depending on how aware your organisation is, your business is about that, you may have different processes in when it comes to changing receipt of areas where payments are going to be received. I mean, how many of you would have that within your business? You know, a process around changing the payments details. Yeah, I've got some hands up. How many don't have it? Anyone prepared to put their... No? But something to consider, and it may not, you know, unless you're aware of it, you probably wouldn't have the processes in. But certainly something we're seeing growing, and it's not just the public sector which has been hit with it, but the private sector, individuals, and particular areas, business, where you think actually that's quite an obscure one. Recently we've seen farmers being targeted with it. They're small businesses, they make payments, they're not necessarily particularly aware around security, very vulnerable. So, you know, it's about getting messages out to those particular businesses. The method is fairly straightforward. It's some form of contact with staff members, convincing them that the payment needs to be changed, getting the payment changed. Very basic. The cyber bit comes in with the emails, the spoofing, etc. Use of virtual telephony. So again, very difficult to trace, but very easy to do. And not necessarily being done from the UK even. You know, you can sit anywhere and do this now. And that's certainly becoming a bigger and bigger problem for us. The days when our villains were local and you could find them, it's disappearing rapidly. A lot of this crime, because of the internet, you can do anywhere and do it successfully and appear to be anywhere. Another interesting one, we've seen a whole spike with around the UK, Europe, CEO fraud. Again, you'll see a lot of these within policing, these sort of particular titles. This basically amounts to a similar thing to the mandate, but instead of it coming in as a sort of a customer asking for a payment, it's someone posing to be a senior member of the organisation's board. Getting a spoofed phone call, spoofed email put in, and basically trying to get people within the accounts department to make a payment. It's an urgent payment, it's a sensitive payment, it's a secretive payment, it's to do with a merger, it's to do with some business that's being done, and we don't want a huge amount of publicity about it, but there's a lot of pressure on it. It's got to be done quickly. It's a large payment that needs to go through. And we're seeing businesses falling for this. You know, people within accounts departments making the payment. And it's only when they start querying it, they find out the person they've been speaking to, who has sort of convinced them that they are a genuine board member or the chief executive or chief financial officer, actually knows nothing about it. By that time, the payment money has moved. And then you're sort of into trying to chase that money. And the chasing it is difficult because you're talking about people who are organised on a European or international basis. So the money is hitting one bank account and being out of that account within literally minutes. So trying to actually follow that money has been very difficult. We've been doing some work with Europol about this, and we're seeing UK businesses being targeted from overseas with this. And again, the people who are carrying this out are not necessarily staying in the UK, and they're organised on a European level. And outside of Europe, so the US, Israel, parts of the Middle East are also linked in with this, and large amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds, potentially being lost. Another one, this actually is interesting because it's not necessarily going to affect you guys directly, but it will hit you in regard to the collateral cost and reputation. And what we're seeing is UK businesses being used as a sort of a come-on for businesses overseas, particularly in Europe, who are being approached by what appears to be a UK company. And generally it's a UK company with a fairly good reputation. So when they do some customer due diligence around the company, they think, yeah, actually this is one I want to do business with. Large UK supermarkets, large UK retailers have particularly been used for this. Businesses approached overseas, asked to produce product, asked to deliver it into the UK. Sometimes transport is provided. Often it isn't, but there'll be a delivery point in the UK. goods are delivered, when the invoices go in, they get told actually the business they think they're doing business with actually knows nothing about it. So it's a sort of variation on sort of long and short-term frauds, but particularly being directed against businesses overseas, where perhaps they're not quite as aware of who it is they're doing business, and it's harder for them to do some of the customer due diligence. All sorts of goods, foodstuffs we're seeing, which is quite worrying, because it's the type of foodstuffs where actually they're perishable, and we know they're going back into the UK market, but not being properly treated and protected, so potentially there's some health risks issues there. Electrical goods, we're sort of starting to see pre-Christmas, the sort of kind of Christmas goods, alcohol, champagne, that are fairly attractive on the UK market. Some of it's staying here, some of it's going literally straight out of the country. Organised Eastern European crime groups sort of seem to be heavily involved in this, and again, part of the operation is in the UK, part of it's outside, so particularly difficult to investigate. From your point of view, as businesses, you're the ones that are going to potentially have the irate European supplier knocking on your door, threatening legal action, damaging your reputation overseas and in the UK, but also causing the issues around how you then deal with that, how you deal with that particular customer, how you deal with your customer chain when word gets out. So some real issues there. And some of the larger retailers in the UK have come to us, and we've been talking with European law enforcement about how we can sort of spread the message. So from the City of London position, it's quite difficult to get to a wine supplier in Greece, an olive supplier in Italy. We just don't have the setup to get those messages out. So we're looking at how some of those larger retailers can use their supply chain to actually get messages out, to give warnings and give some advice about proper due diligence. The purer cyber, things we're seeing, data thefts. A bigger and bigger issue. You probably see them on the news regularly, all the time, large volume data thefts, and it's because there's a market out there. That data is worth money. Certainly anything to do with customers, credit cards, details that can then be used for further fraud. Not necessarily the person who's stealing it going to be using it, they can sell it on. And it may get sold on to other parties as well. But from the criminal's point of view, from organised crime point of view, anyone who's got data, and certainly if it includes customer data that has credit cards attached to it, has a very valuable item that they want to get. You've probably seen recently issues around large data thefts in the UK and US, organisations like Target, Home Depot, large volumes, and quite sophisticated hacks. And not necessarily going straight for the organisation themselves. If you look at the Target attack, the retailer in the US, it wasn't Target that was actually hit. It was one of their suppliers that was targeted. And because they linked into the same IT system, they were able to get into Target. So when you're sort of looking, and I'll talk a little bit about risk, doing your risk assessment, you've got to be thinking about those organisations around you, especially with the cyber element being there, because the links are now there between different businesses. Often the vulnerability may not sit with your business, it may sit with one of your partners, or one of your suppliers, or one of your contractors. And are you sure that their systems are up to the same level as yours? Because if they're not, that weakness hits you. Denial of service, we're still seeing these. Large UK retailers, certainly we're aware have been hit, where their site's been taken down, and of course that's potentially serious money. Certainly if you're trading online and suddenly your method of communicating with your customers has gone, that has an impact. Not just sort of in the short term, the business loss, but also in the longer term in regard to your reputation with those customers. Are they going to go elsewhere? Quite often those are attached to blackmail attempts. Some of them will be simply the initial sort of look what we can do, and then followed by an attempt to blackmail. Again, a lot of that linked to Eastern European organised crime. We've got a high level of technical sophistication. Trying to track the money down, if monies are paid, very difficult again, because they're using the international financial system to move that money rapidly, knowing what the limitations of law enforcement are in regard to tracing that money. Phishing and spear phishing attacks. So phishing, you're sending it out in large volumes, not really too bothered who it's going to hit. Traditionally, perhaps you think of that's not necessarily a problem for businesses, but it is, because potentially your staff are going to be the ones who are going to be picking these up. Some of it's, you've got bits of malware sat within the actual email, or it's leading people into emails, or leading it into sites where you've got malware viruses that could end up on your systems. The spear phishing, that's where you've got the aim specifically at individuals. So with the target attack, for example, that was done with an email that's directed at a particular individual within a contractor of the organisation they were targeting. So very, very carefully thought out, and a piece of malware that was designed specifically for that company that they were targeting. No, they knew what systems that target used, they knew how they took customer details, they knew the weaknesses before the things like card numbers were encrypted, and they were able to design malware that targeted that, got them the data, and got the data out without it being noticed. So a very sophisticated attack, and it all based on that one email that went in to a particular individual. So, you know, very, very highly targeted. Reporting, fraud and cybercrime. I mentioned action fraud. That's where you should be doing it. I put in cybercrime, I think, also because unfortunately the title action fraud doesn't necessarily lead you straight into thinking of cyber, but that's also where you should be reporting cyber attacks. Certainly anything financially motivated relating to cyber should be coming into us, and in fact we will take most of it anyway. Fraud, obviously that sort of speaks for itself, and we're really looking at Fraud Act offences and Misuse of Computer Act offences, so damaging computers, damaging data, reducing their efficiency, gaining illegal access. 2 channels to get that data in. First one, and bearing in mind the system was designed initially for the public, so, and it's then been expanded to small businesses and then businesses in general. Phone centre, so you've got 2 call centres, one in Edinburgh, one in Manchester, dedicated staff there, so they're not selling double glazing when they're not taking reports. This is all they do. The organisation that run it is non-for-profit. They put a lot of effort into training staff. They have a very high staff retention. So you've got quite a high level of professionality in regard to the support side of it. Have any of you made a report by telephone to action fraud? Oh, got one there, okay. Probably the one that's going to interest yourselves more is the online tool. So, call centre, it's not available 24 hours a day, but the online tool is. Have any of you used that, reported over the online tool? Yeah, okay. Two ways of doing it. One of it is the system's really aimed at the general public, based on no knowledge of fraud. And I know we've had discussions with businesses. If they've used that, they've found it quite clunky, because it is quite time consuming. It's really designed for the individual, a member of the public, or perhaps a small business where they're reporting very, very rarely, if it may be their first and only time. So it's taking them through the fraud. So by that, the nature of that, it does take time. What we've also designed, though, is a business reporting tool, which is really designed for probably people like yourselves, but you need to register for it. You do it online, on the site, and that basically takes a lot of the pain out of the reporting. It assumes a level of knowledge whereby you're not being sort of, say, asked a series of questions that gets you to the fact that it's a staff fraud. It gives you a drop-down list and you can pick staff fraud straight away. It basically assumes that you have some knowledge around that. That in itself, maybe for larger businesses, again, quite time-consuming. So what we're just about to launch is a bulk reporting tool, whereby we can take data on things like spreadsheets. And we're designing a spreadsheet that basically you'll be able to put data in, fill the fields out, and we will be able to ingest it straight. So rather than put individual reports. So again, keep your eye out for that. That will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Again, that's from feedback from businesses. You know, rather than having to put any individual reports, this is what's been asked for, and we've tried to sort of adapt to that. Again, it will be something that we will build to, because obviously that's potentially impactive on us. The volumes potentially will go up quite dramatically, and we've got to make sure we can manage that. Background, some of this you may know or may not, but basically since April the 1st, 2013, all English and Welsh forces, police forces, should be reporting to action fraud, either directly or referring people to action fraud. So Fraud Act offences, Computer Misuse Act offences, and at the moment, and actually we've just done some work on this and this has just gone up as of this morning, it's about 22,500 to 23,000 crimes a month we're getting in, and that's across so individuals, business, public, private sector. And we do get reports also from overseas victims where there's sort of a UK locus. Those volumes have gone up from 18,000 last year, so we're seeing sort of a slow increase, but it's still an increase that's sort of having an impact on our work. The basic system, just to give you sort of a bit of an overview, you've got the action fraud process which gets the information in. That then links to a database called No Fraud, which is part of the NFIB, and that's where we've got data from previously reported crimes. We've got data from CIFAS, so we take an ingest from CIFAS in regard to reports of crime that have gone in through CIFAS, and through the banking industry, through Financial Fraud Action UK. So we've sort of really got 3 data sets sat in there. Crimes go in, they're matched against data that already exists there. So what we're trying to do is, rather than, and this is sort of, I suppose, traditionally the problem with fraud is that you make your report, it gets dealt with as a sort of in isolation. Meanwhile, somebody else, another victim, is reporting similar fraud, same suspect, and again that's dealt with in isolation, and they didn't necessarily always match up. The process here is really designed to catch that at the early stage when you're reporting. It should identify those links. It does it fairly successfully with fraud. But with cyber, we're finding, the pure cyber, we're finding some issues around trying to get that matching, get that linking. We've had to adapt our system slightly in regard to that, because the traditional things we were looking for to link don't necessarily exist in cyber. Phone numbers, names of individuals, etc. So what then happens to it? It's scored automatically. So you've got 22,000 crimes going in. They're scored for viability. We're looking for those areas where you can actually investigate successfully and get a potential investigation and hopefully a conviction at the end of it. Of those 22,000, about 10,000 score sufficiently, or in a category where actually no matter what it scores, we would want to investigate it. Mandate fraud we would treat like that because there's generally a bank account. Staff employee fraud, you know who the staff member is. So they are categories that we would look at automatically. And anything with a loss over £100,000, again, we would look at, irrelevant of what it's scored. It's then manually reviewed, so we have a team of crime reviewers. There are 26 of them at the moment, so not necessarily a huge number, but they work very, very hard. And they're doing the reviewing. They're looking for those links. They're looking for then bringing in other information from other sources. So we're looking at police sources, of intelligence, previously reported crime, etc. We're looking at open source material, so material that's available through things like Companies House, Land Registry, other sources of information to try and build that richer picture. And we're also looking at where it needs to go. Which police force or other agency is going to be best placed to investigate this. Our primary target is to find out where the suspect is. So we're generally pushing crimes out to where we believe the suspect is, rather than where the victims are. Especially with crimes where you've got multiple victims, you know, there's some real issues about who is responsible. You know, if you've got victims in Scotland, you've got victims in Cornwall, victims in London, you don't want to be sending it out to 3 forces. You want to see where the suspects are, and that's where we would end look to put it. Again, with cyber, we have a real issue in actually identifying where suspects are because of the nature of it, so quite often that will go to where the victim is. So a slight difference there. Who do we put them out to? Police forces within England and Wales and Scotland we put work out to, and PSNI in Northern Ireland. Even places like Jersey Police we've put cases out to. We will share data with Interpol where we don't feel that we can house it in the UK, and we also work with organisations like Trading Standards where it may be a case best dealt with via trading standards, or they're already dealing with some part of it. As I said, the data we've got sat in there, it's existing crime, so a crime that's reported, you may get a crime in there, initially nothing happens with it, other data comes in, it links up, and the whole lot comes out of the system and is scored and evaluated and sent out for dissemination. CIFAS, again we've got a lot of data from CIFAS, so the CIFAS fraud database all ingested on a regular basis into No Fraud. So we've got that data sat there. So if we get reports from action fraud that link to any of that data, two are linked together and it all comes out at the end and is reviewed. And likewise, the banking industry through financial fraud action. We're looking at doing this, which is sort of creating networks. That's a fairly simple one. I think the biggest network we've had it's had 3,000 different identities, 3,000 different cases linked to it, with all the sort of other links around phone numbers, addresses, etc. that went with it. It's absolutely huge. That wouldn't be typical. Majority of what we put out, it's maybe 3 or 4 crimes linked together, but some of them, I say, can be quite massive. Others, they simply sit on their own. We've organised the team in 5 different desks, with another desk doing disruption and prevention. So a cybercrime desk dealing with pure cyber, a team looking at mass marketing aimed at individuals, investment fraud, again aimed at individuals generally, volume crime, which is your sort of online shopping, etc. And then a banking and corporate desk, which is dealing with crimes against business. And then finally a disruption and preventions team. So we're looking where perhaps we can't put together an investigation. Is there something we can do that will actually disrupt that? So we're harvesting details of bank accounts, phone numbers, email addresses, websites, and we're getting those taken down. In the case of websites, email addresses, we'll get those closed down. Phone numbers, again, we'll get those closed down. Bank accounts, we'll let the banks know, and they will close those down. So it may be that we don't actually get our hands on the suspects, particularly in areas like mass marketing where the suspects are generally sat overseas, but what we can do is interrupt their ability to communicate with victims and to cash out, get money out through the financial system. Outputs, what do we produce, as well as the disseminations. We do a monthly intelligence update to law enforcement and partners, and if you're interested in that, I'll give my email address at the end, and if you email me, I'll arrange to get you onto that list. Targeted alerts, so we shared information with business where we've got a particular issue and we think you should know about it. We'll push that out to larger businesses, but also through through business organisations that represent small businesses. Have any of you seen any of our alerts? Got one there. Anybody up? 2? Okay, it's not brilliant, but it's a start. So I'll give you my email address at the end. If you're interested, I'll get you put on the list. Debrief reports, this is interesting. We've got a team that go and interview fraudsters and cyber criminals in prison and ask them how they did it. Now, they won't necessarily tell us who did it and who they did it with, but they're quite willing to tell us the methodologies they've used. I don't know whether it's sort of something in the psychology of fraudsters. It's that thing of wanting to be clever and seem to be cleverer than the people who are investigating them, but actually they'll provide a high level of detail about the methods and techniques they've used. So we've got a team who specialise in doing those interviews, capturing that data, and again, we share that with law enforcement partners. So we're identifying the actual methods that real criminals are using, hopefully pretty much real time. We do profiles for each police force as to what their crime looks like. So at the moment, I think the first set was divided between cyber and fraud. I think the next one's just about to come out, puts the two together. But it gives each individual police force and the commissioner or chief officer of that force an idea of what fraud and cybercrime looks like in their area. And it will look at particular types of crime, who it's aimed at, what victims they've got within their force. So it's really sort of sharing the products of what we're recovering through the no fraud system. And then we work with the National Crime Agency to produce strategic threat assessments for the UK and sectors of business and within the UK. And lastly, we work on prevention campaigns. We're just about to launch one, the 12 Frauds of Christmas. Initially it was aimed purely at individuals, but we've now got that to include some business type frauds where we think businesses potentially at this time of year are more likely to be victim. Where do we disseminate to? You can't see the things on the bottom, but I'll tell you the very big one is the Met. By far our biggest customer. So when we heard that Falcon was coming online, we were absolutely overjoyed because it means that our biggest customer for our crime reports that we disseminate has now got a specialist team that are dealing with those. And it's made already, from our point of view, it's made a huge difference to how crime across London is being dealt with. So very, very much in favour of that. It's been a big thing. Other organisations, we do send out to partners, and partners is generally trading standards, are our biggest partner, but we also provide material cases to other organisations. And then the rest of it's police forces. And pretty much, I suppose, what you'd expect. West Midlands, Greater Manchester Police, again, they are large customers of ours. Some simple measures to reduce it, and again, I make of this what you will. I said that some of this may be a little on the sort of too simple side, some of it may be sort of something that only large organisations would consider, but I'll sort of try and sort of cover as much as I can. Cyber Essentials. Are any of you aware of this? It's a government scheme. Has anyone heard of it? Good, okay. It's basically a minimum standard for your IT security systems. Now, I think traditionally, IT sits somewhere else, and actually it shouldn't. If you're dealing with security in general, particularly fraud, or you should be dealing with now the cyber side of it, because it's absolutely key to it, because it's where your vulnerabilities are going to be. And this really sets some basic standards around your firewalls, how people can access your systems, how they're configured in such a way as to protect them. And it may be the protection is not equal across the whole system. I think the days when you had a perimeter defence and you had all your defences on the outside, and once someone was inside, it was free reign, those are gone. I think it's about identifying what your assets are, what the real assets that are actually vital to your business are, making sure that those are protected to a much, much higher level. Because they're going to get in, is the bottom line of it. And it's how far they get in that we need to be looking at. We're not necessarily always going to be able to stop them at that first sort of contact. But user access, that includes obviously your own staff, making sure that people are not moving through the organisation and building up sets of access, and they're not having rights removed from them. I mean, the classic, I suppose, is you see members of your organisation who move through personnel, maybe into the sales side, they've still got the personnel access, or they've got access to accounts, to payments, and nobody thinks to take those accesses away, or to check whether they still need them. It sounds pretty basic, but we're still seeing this with organisations. People building up rights to different systems that actually they do not need. So tight control of that, as well obviously as access to other organisations that are going to potentially need to access your systems. Contractors, again, big issue, maintaining your contractors, making sure that they have been properly vetted, and that the agreement in regard to vetting between whoever is providing that contractor, if it's through an employment agency, that you are quite clear on what you've expected them to provide in regard to vetting, and that they've done it, and that they are clear on what you do. Obviously, malware protection, proper software, proper systems to actually protect through malware. It's up to date and kept up to date, and patching. So as patches come out, that they're loaded onto your systems. Probably for the bigger companies, less of a problem, and it probably sits with IT. But for small businesses, making sure that your systems are up to date, those basic software systems, and they have the patches, because the patches are there to protect. They come out of other people who have fallen victim to various things. Those really, if you're not updating your system, you're going to be in trouble. And this really is the basic standard. So if your business isn't doing this, everything else is basically going to fall over. So if you're not aware of this, definitely have a look at it. Make sure your IT people are aware of this and that they're implementing this. Human factor, especially with cyber, there's assuming everything is technical. Actually, it's often the weakest point is the people. It's still the people. A lot of the data thefts we're seeing are not actually cyber attacks. They're people within organisations who are being got to. They're either being coerced, bribed, or tricked into providing that information. And it's much easier than having to get somebody techie in to try and hack into a system if you can actually get someone who's already got access to that system to do it for you. So the human factor is still key. And obviously your defences are around keeping the ones out you don't want in, so your staff screening, making sure your processes are up to speed, and then continued vetting, making sure, as appropriate, and again it's probably on a risk-based approach, that your vetting of staff already in is still being carried out. there's nothing worse than someone coming at a low level in the organisation who came in at the very basic level of screening, works their way up in the organisation, and that was the only checking that was ever done on them when they came in at the bottom. So consideration around continued vetting of staff. And then on the brighter side, probably your staff are going to be almost your first trip point. They're going to be the ones that see the red flags if they know what they're looking for. So it's about training your staff, getting their awareness to the point where they're actually going to act as that sort of screening device for you and your business. Again, if they're not aware of what they're looking for, they're not going to protect your business. So things like the mandate frauds, the CEO frauds, if your staff are aware of that type of fraud existing, they're far less likely to become victim of it. So, looking at regular training, varying your training, so it's not just an email or sending or computer-based training, but you actually vary it. In the same way as you'd handle if you were working on the sort of compliance side, money laundering. It's very, very similar. You're looking at the same issues, varying the training, getting it to the right people, getting it to the right level. So not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. How am I doing for time? 5 minutes, okay. Your corporate identity, your business. In the same way as for individuals, our identity has value to criminals, so does your businesses. And that can be a number of things. It can be using your business as with the European distribution fraud, or short or long firm frauds where they're using the business as a sort of the credibility of your business to trick somebody else. Using your website or what looks like your website, again to trick. So, as part of your IT security, do you regularly look to see if there are any sites that are out there that potentially could be mistaken for your website? The classic thing of the Tesco's with a 0 instead of an O in the middle of it. Is that something you would look at identifying? Also, would you preempt it by buying those sites? You've just had a new set of sites made available, with a .London. Did you have a look at your business to see if you're London-based? Has somebody bought the website that's got your name attached to it? So, those things, having those processes in place, so that rather than sort of those things coming up, you're actually looking ahead. It may be that you're already doing that. It may be part of your process, but something to think of if you haven't. Obviously, company registration, making sure your registration company's house is properly protected. Phone spoofing, again, it's a difficult one. If somebody's using your phone number, how do you protect yourself against that? At the moment, we haven't come up with an answer about that. We're trying to get some of the apps taken off to make it a little bit harder for criminals to actually use this. But as I said, literally pennies will buy you an app that will make your phone number appear to be anybody's. Effective risk assessment. Again, I'm probably teaching you to suck eggs on this, but this really should be the key. If you don't know what your risks are, how can you protect yourself against them? And a plan for if it does go wrong, and it probably will, unfortunately, how are you going to deal with it? Who is going to deal with it? The last thing you want to be doing is trying to deal with a major cyber incident or a major fraud incident on the hoof. You should have a plan in place. How many of your organisations have a sort of a major incident response plan in regard to cyber or fraud? 2 at the back. Any 3? Okay. As I say, we've seen this with businesses where something goes wrong and they're trying to put the plan together as it's happening, and it just doesn't work. You're so far behind at that point. You need to get these things in place and ready so that when it does go wrong, you know who to go to, you know who has what responsibility. You know what things like data loss. Where is the data? Where is your data? Who has access to it? Who are the people who are going to be able to get you the information you're going to need to try and control or limit that breach? How do you contact them? Do you have their phone numbers? Where do you go if they're on holiday? Those sort of things. So having that plan in place, it gives you a huge leg up when these things do go wrong. I think we're doing questions at the end, so I'll jump over that. That's me. That's my email address and my mobile phone number. So it's a job one, so if you want to use it, you are free to do so. I hope it's been useful. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through things, but it's quite a wide field to cover just in 20 minutes. But I hope that's been useful.